Hey everyone, so in this video we're going to be going over S-Class Willy, who is a free-to-play character that has just been released in the game and can be acquired by collecting Rubik's Cubes in an assortment of different missions and then redeeming in the black market. So Willy is a pretty interesting character. Now, I know I have another video that's labeled S-Class Willy, and that's because at first Willy was going to have Mateo's active skill, adrenaline rush, specialist skill, stats, you name it. So I will end up going back and renaming that video, but this is the real Willy. So Willy has a pretty interesting rush, 66 AP, a line of enemies get 4,000 trauma, stun, and 50% heal reduction for 2 turns. He also regains 100% HP, which works incredibly well with his specialist skill, Overheal. Now, Willy's active skill is something that is confusing a lot of people. It's a heal self ability and recover enemies. Now, to be honest, this active skill is incredibly clever. Like, it is very well thought out and works a lot better than what people realize. It is a little slow, being a turn 3 active skill and requiring 3 turns to cool down. So I would either like to see the initial cooldown turn to turn 2, or the cooldown time from 3 turns to become 2 turns, just so that it lines up a little better with his rush only being 66 AP. But what his active skill does, this character regains up to 100% of their max HP, and a line of enemies recover from all penalties. Now, a lot of players don't understand the strength in this. They think, well, aren't you doing the opponent a big favor? And to be honest, you could be. If Willy is on a defensive team and he uses this active skill, there is no guarantee that trauma is applied to that line of enemies. So that makes him kind of a liability on defense, to be honest. What makes his combination good for, say, an attacking toon, and not that a passive attacking toon, is how trauma actually functions. So trauma is a skill that when a toon is under the influence of it and unnaturally recovers from a penalty. So in Willy's case, he applies stun, heal reduction, and trauma to an enemy toon. If an enemy recovers from stun, heal reduction, and trauma, we used to think like Zachary recovers all penalties, or Gabriel, or Mackenzie. Shiva, when she rushes, or active skill, I think, she can recover from all penalties. They will get a flat amount of damage equal to the trauma damage times the number of things that they recover from unnaturally. And trauma is always removed last. So in this case, if you rush Willy down a line of enemies and apply 4,000 trauma, stun, and heal reduction, and then use his active skill on those toons, they're recovering from stun and heal reduction and then trauma, meaning they're getting 8,000 flat damage. Now, this really only works on a manual attack team and a very specific type of attack team. On an auto attack team, Willy would become unreliable. He could rush one line and then use his active skill down a different line and end up actually healing the enemy instead of applying trauma damage. So you need to be really careful with it. This is not the type of toon that you really want to put on a defensive team. It's not the type of toon you want to put on auto, basically, where the AI has to make decisions, because I'm not sure how Willy will react, say if he's focused. Will he keep using his rush on the same line and active skill on the same line, or will it be random? It's really hard to say as well as hard to test, but Willy really is a niche toon. I think he could be really solid because of his overheal ability. Whenever he rushes, regaining 100% HP, that's really huge, to be honest. But I would just be wary of using him. I can definitely see myself using him on some very specific attack teams where I can apply bleed to the enemy, burn, maybe some maim, just using mods to my advantage, really, and applying trauma, because trauma is something that can actually stack. And what I mean by that is, if I rush a line and apply 4,000 trauma to them, and say I rush Ivanova down the same line, I think Ivanova applies 2,000 trauma. The point is, the enemy toon will have 6,000 trauma. So every single penalty that they end up recovering from, so stun, taunt, confuse, impair, defense down, attack down, normalize, disarm, daze, bleed, burn, maim, infection. But with infection, healing the infection is not unnatural. That's a natural way of recovering it, so that should not trigger trauma. But the point is, you can trigger trauma in so many ways, and 4,000 trauma is quite high. Next, when we take a look at Willy's weapon, it's pretty unique and it's pretty effective. 30% HP, a medium bonus to AP when attacking, and at the start of every turn, this character regains up to 25% of their max HP. When this is coupled with the overheal, so how overheal works is that if there's any extra healing that would go over the 100% of the HP bar, half of it will be transferred into bonus HP. So if you had 100% HP and it was the start of a turn, so at the very beginning of a raid, 25%, half of that, so 12.5%, will be transferred into bonus HP. Now that doesn't help against burn, bleed, maim, infection, but it can help make him to be a pretty tanky character. Now with Willy's weapon, I am going to add AP to it. I technically don't have to. I feel like at 66 AP, there are a number of ways to get him to rush pretty quickly anyway. But I am going to add a huge bonus to AP, kind of a safe type of craft to make. So what I'm going with for Willy's weapon, I'm going for 40% HP, a huge bonus to AP when attacking. And then for the fourth slot, if I did want to use him on defense, I know I said that it's not the greatest just because you don't know what line of enemies he's going to recover, but healing 10% per each debuff on Willy could be pretty effective, because if someone ends up normalizing him, for example, so his overheal is turned off, if they disarm him so that his weapon isn't healing him anymore, if he's impaired so that he can't rush anymore, so like a Leopo rushes him, for example, well, then that weapon would heal him 30%, because there would be 3 status effects on him. You could also do something like Stonewall on his fourth slot so that his defense cannot be lowered. You could add something clever like Ransack so that he can steal positive effects from the enemy team. There are just so many different ways you could manipulate Willy's weapon. I think he is an interesting character to have. There's a lot of healing going on. It's just that active skill that can be a little worrisome. So I guess the cooldown of 3 turns isn't bad when you think of him on the defensive end, but if you're running a type of weapon where you're healing per each debuff applied to you, allowing the enemy to rush you might be okay, so long as you can survive their rush and they're applying status effects to you. So the type of defensive team that I would probably make if I had Willy, like this is if I chose to run him on defense, I would probably run him with Shiva, so I'm working on getting my S-Class Shiva. I would probably run Frost, Georgia, who I got from WOC, and I'd just use a Mercer lead because that's the only type of leader that I have for blue and green toons. So it would be a little interesting, like this is the type of team that could heal often. It doesn't apply a lot of damage other than Mercer, which means the attacker wouldn't be able to run payback on attack to as much effectiveness. So the type of mods that I would give Willy, I'm thinking defensive set, just because I think his HP is already pretty high, but we're going to give him an HP mod anyway. What I like doing with mods, I either like giving them a 100% chance of if this happens, this mod will proc. So an example is defense when stunned. So if Willy is stunned, then he's getting extra defense, which means it's hard for the opponent to attack him. It also means that if I'm stunned, I'm healing by 10% because of my weapon. I'm using a heal reduction mod just because his whole kit is about healing himself and surviving. So having a heal reduction mod is a must in my opinion. I can either add a defense mod here, but I don't feel like I need it. Instead, I'm going to add a bleed resist mod just because of the new bleed towers that they have coming out. I feel like it would be a wise thing to do since Willy's overheal, well, the overheal, the bonus HP, doesn't protect you from bleed. So this will just help with making sure that he doesn't die because of an enormous amount of bleed being stacked onto him. And for the last slot, I guess defense versus alert will do just because that's what he's weak towards. You could also do defense versus tough because there's still a lot of tough toons being used on attack. There's just so many different toons and types of toons and abilities that you can use to leverage your position. So I'm just going to equip some mods onto this defensive team, and then I'm going to run an offensive team against this defensive team that I just made up. It's not perfect, of course, but it's just to showcase what Willy can kind of do. So you'll notice that Willy's HP bar is a little bugged out. So his weapon right now is currently not working, so you can't see the 25% HP that is being added to him unless the overheal is triggered, which is kind of annoying. So every part of his weapon right now isn't really functioning. So he should be healing by 10% because he has, well, actually 20% because he has Impair and Confuse applied to him, but he's not doing that at the moment. So it's a little confusing what's going on, and it's hard to kind of show you because you can see the overheal occurring in this case. But otherwise, you'll notice that there's a big visual bug with his HP bar. Like even when Willy ends up rushing, he gains bonus HP because of the overheal, but he will still be shown with less HP in his bar. And it's really confusing, to be honest, and I'm not exactly sure why that's happening. I'm hoping that in this next part of the video, we'll be able to see it a little bit better. So we can see that Willy is visually ready to rush. His HP is low, his weapon triggered, and he's rushing, and the overheal occurs, but his HP is still stuck, like visually low. But we just checked, he's at 7301 HP. That does not include bonus HP. And when we enter the match right away and check, he's at 7,731, exactly like before. So visually, his HP bar is not showing correctly when he rushes or with his weapon part of the time. It would be interesting to see how something like a lifesteal mod would work on him, and to see if we did a weapon swap that healed, if that would also have a different effect and actually show his HP properly. It's just a little confusing right now, and I feel like it'll confuse a lot of people if Willy isn't fixed before people can actually acquire him as an S-Class toon, that is. Now we're going to take a look at Willy on an offensive team. I really want to showcase how his trauma works and kind of how his rush can work in conjunction with Ivanova's rush. I think it's a pretty unique ability, to be honest. And I think it's important to showcase this so people understand how trauma works, because so few toons have trauma, and we just haven't really ever used it because it's very subjective and situational. So I rush down a line, minus 25% defense, there's some burn applied, then I rush Willy as well. We see 6,000 trauma damage, defense down, heal reduction, and stun. So for the sake of this video, I'm going to let Sheila use her active skill to showcase trauma first, just to show how we usually rely upon the defensive team to trigger it. So she recovered heal reduction off of both of them, and you can see that they took 6,000 trauma damage, which nearly kills them. When I use Willy's active skill and recover the rest, we can see that they take 18,000 flat damage. Now, this is a really effective way of killing enemy toons, because unlike exhaust damage, which is transmitted as maim damage, trauma damage is completely flat, which is kind of nice. Like, exhaust can be resisted and maim damage can be resisted. If you have a maim resist, it means you can resist the exhaust damage that you might take. With trauma, you have to have a trauma resist, or you have to have a skill that can recover trauma. And as a general reminder, recovering trauma does not trigger trauma. Recovering anything else will trigger trauma, except for recovering trauma itself, which is a little confusing at times, but it kind of makes sense as well. Overall, I think Willy is a real niche toon. I would like to see his active skill adjusted a little bit, but it's also tough because if he's used on a defensive team, you don't really want to be healing the enemy toons very often, so it's a real toss-up. Like, his kit works for him, but on manual only, in my opinion. Anyway, thank you everyone for watching and listening to my video.